All right. So everybody's going to be upset with his top 10. I'm going to start it right there. And look, listen to me carefully. There is no easy way for us to be able to rank a top 10 right now with everything that exists in college football. And nobody really deserves to be top 10 outside of like Georgia. So just keep that in mind. Number one is Georgia. It's obvious they thumped Georgia Tech. They look dominant in doing so. It is a team that lost 55 to nothing to Notre Dame last week, but Georgia has been dominant on both sides of the ball all year. They're a top three offense in terms of points per drive. They play slower, so people look at the scores and they don't realize what it means. But they're just burning clock and scoring and burning clock and scoring, and it is a slow march to death for everyone that plays them. We probably should have talked about them more than we have, but it's just hard to. My number two, people are already going to be mad, is Alabama. Hear me out. My number two is Alabama. My number three is Michigan. My number four is Ohio State. I'll just tell you 2, 3, and 4 because I want to talk about them together. Michigan this year and Alabama have the same record. Michigan's loss was to Michigan State team that I don't know if they are or not really better than Texas A&M. And you can talk about records all you want. Michigan State had a very weak schedule. But Michigan has been up and down, and like 20-13 against Rutgers is really, really bad. You can talk about nearly losing to Auburn all you want. Auburn is on a different planet than Rutgers. Michigan has played well throughout the stretch, but like 21-17 Penn State, I think that's about the same team as Auburn based off on the field result. I think Alabama's potential is a lot higher than Michigan. Michigan maybe is a little bit more consistent, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But Alabama's ceiling is definitely a lot higher. Their ability to score on a high-level defense, I think, is a lot higher because they have a more vertical attack, especially since Bell went out for Michigan. That's why I have Alabama above Michigan. And then Ohio State, I got a 2-loss team at number 4 ahead of Cincinnati at number 5, and that's going to make people hella mad. But I always say if you lose, especially if you lose close to a team that I have like in the top 3, I'm going to be really hesitant to drop you very far because, look, I don't think Cincinnati is going to beat a top team right now either. Just being blunt, I don't. And when you look at Cincinnati and their schedule, and they blew up Eastern Carolina, who's a bad team. They blew up SMU, that was a little bit overranked, and then before then, struggle win against Tulsa, struggle win against Tulane, struggle win against Navy. There have been a lot of rough patches for Cincinnati. It's tough. I could put them above Ohio State if you want to make that argument. I'm not going to complain. I think it's hard for me to put them ahead of Michigan, given who Michigan's played and how Michigan's done and who Michigan's beaten. Maybe I should put Cincinnati ahead of Ohio State, but resume, record versus quality, it's a very, very tough decision, and the strength of schedule is just way, way, way different between those two schools. My number, again, 5 was Cincinnati, 6 is Notre Dame. Notre Dame, we're getting to the point where I don't think these teams could ever have any hope of passing the ones in front of them. Cincinnati's head-to-head over Notre Dame is real. I don't care what people say about whatever they think the spread would be for Notre Dame with Cincinnati. I don't think Notre Dame would be favored over Cincinnati right now. I think Notre Dame should be lucky to be number 6 based off the quality level that they're at. I kind of have Notre Dame here, frankly, because who else are you going to put? Notre Dame has been good down the stretch. I mean, some of those wins, like 44-34 over North Carolina, haven't held up to be much of a win. 32-29 over Virginia Tech does not look good in retrospect. Close win over Florida State in the opener. I think Notre Dame has played a much weaker schedule than we want to give credit for. They get a lot of traction over their blowout win over Wisconsin, which is really the one good win on that whole resume. And Wisconsin is clearly a team that can go into total implosion mode. And I remind people, Wisconsin game was 10-10 at the start of the fourth quarter. Wisconsin got down, had to go into catch-up mode, and that caused the game to run away really, really late when Wisconsin was throwing the ball every play and throwing interceptions. Next for me, number 7 is Ole Miss. We've been on the Ole Miss bandwagon, week 2 of the season. It's probably the most underrated team in the country. They're going to finish 10-2. They're going to finish 10-2 with a very difficult schedule. Their only losses were to Auburn in a game where they were out 5 offensive starters, and to Alabama in a blowout, which there's no real shame in that early. They beat Arkansas. They beat LSU by multiple touchdowns. They beat Tennessee. They blew out Liberty. They beat Texas A&M by multiple scores. They beat Mississippi State by multiple scores. They have absolutely, in my mind, earned the right to be number 7. Number 8 for me is going to be the winner of the Oklahoma State-Oklahoma game. It's currently 33-37 while I'm recording this, so I don't know who's going to win. But I feel like the story's a little bit similar on both sides. I am not super high on the Big 12. It's hard for me to overlook the fact that you've got a one-loss team, but I can't put them any higher than this. Even I'm going to have them behind a 2-loss Ole Miss because I just think the Big 12 is very weak this year. And again, not scheduling any P5s out of conference is a real negative for me for Oklahoma State. And then Oklahoma does, but they look very unimpressive in a lot of games. Number 9 for me is Michigan State. Frankly, they're just kind of there by default. I think they're a solid team with a good defense. I think they're horribly flawed on the back end. I think if they played in a more pass-happy league, like even the Big 12, even if they're a better team than Big 12 teams, they'd have a kind of a crummy record because they're so flawed. And then number 10 for me is Baylor. So you end up, whoever loses Oklahoma State, Oklahoma is going to be out of the top 10 in my mind. Baylor sits there at 10 based off past record and performance, but with their backup quarterback in, they are not really a top 10 team. I just don't like to drop you out of the top 10 when you first lose your quarterback. And I'm not actually 100% sure. That's partly my own fault for how long he's going to be out. But that's my top 10. People are going to say some of these teams don't belong, but man, try to tell me who I left out that's an obvious pick, because I don't think there really is any. And you got a whole bunch of 2 and 3 loss teams after this, all of which have warts. People want chaos, and chaos means warts, and that's what you got in 2021.
Yeah, and the big the big difference for me and you, I think, are where Michigan is and where Ohio State is. Georgia number 1 doesn't require a lot of discussion. I've got Michigan at number 2, and I think that there are legitimate complaints about a couple of things about Michigan. Like, one, the Rutgers game is a real concern for me. They beat Penn State on basically a kind of a like lucky, I want to say lucky deep play to the tight end, I think it was, but they still won that game. And Penn State, as we've said this whole show, is better than their record. But to me, winning the game they won today in the manner that they won it, maybe if they squeak by, it's a little different. But I think Ohio State is a legitimately good team. I don't even think they're as good as you think they are. And yet you've got Alabama ahead of them. And I think you're giving Alabama fairly, I think, in your mind, in more of a power ranking style. Alabama does have a higher ceiling than Michigan. They do. If Alabama puts offense and defense together on the same day, they're beating Georgia. The problem is, until they do that, I'm not going to give them credit for it. And they haven't done it since Mississippi State in like week 4 or 5 or something like that. Since then, and since there's been some book out on how to attack Bryce Young, they haven't put both together. So I can't give them credit for doing something I think they can do without having seen them do it at least once. And they didn't even do it against Arkansas. I've got Cincinnati at number 3. And I hate to do this because I like the EC, I think it was ECU, like not even a great win. Like South Florida, not a great win. They need to be beating these teams by 40 points because they have that luxury. But I also think Cincinnati is a solid team. And I think that if you put them in that game against Auburn today, I can't honestly say that they're down 10-3 with 1:20 left on the clock. I don't think they would be. So after Cincinnati, I have Alabama. This is academic. If they beat Georgia, they're in. If they don't, they're not. For all of our discussion of whether or not Alabama should be punished for that last game, I think it will be sort of like we did with Oklahoma in that, or the AP did. Like we were pushing Oklahoma down in our rankings for barely beating bad teams, right? The floodgates of dropping Alabama will open if they lose to Georgia, and it will be kind of a payback for them barely beating mediocre teams the prior weeks before. And maybe that's not fair, but that's what's going to happen. It's like that loss, even though it's an excusable loss, opens the window for people to have an excuse to punish them for those close wins that happened earlier. After Alabama, I have Ole Miss. People might scoff at that. Ole Miss is 10-2. They're actually playing decent defense. And do you really think in a bowl game or a one-off game scenario with Lane Kiffin having a month to prepare for you that he's not going to he couldn't beat almost any other team in the top 10, including Alabama, who killed them. I think he could. After that, I got the OU OK State winner. The problem with this for me a little bit is that same thing with Baylor is the thing that you're always talking about in terms of looking at two mountain peaks. We don't know that maybe these two mountain peaks are just really low peaks, but because we have no context of larger mountain peaks, we don't know that they're not very good because the Big 12 has played nobody out of conference. After that, I have Ohio State. I would have Ohio State higher if they didn't get murdered today. That defense was never forced Michigan to be uncomfortable. And that's what concerns me a little bit with Ohio State right now and the scoring inefficiencies. Ohio State could go out tomorrow and beat Alabama by 20 points or lose to Alabama by 20 points. I don't know who I'm going to get with them, but I still have them in my top 10 ahead of Michigan State, who they absolutely dragged last week. Michigan State feels a little bit like my number 10 in Baylor in that they're kind of a paper tiger and they shouldn't be in the top 10. But if I'm going to say that for other teams, I got to say it for these two. Like, okay, who else are we going to put in there? BYU? I don't know. Like Iowa, maybe they're 9-2 or 10-2, whatever. That's respectable. But right now, until somebody else does something, I got to give credit for the schedule in the season so far. And Michigan State's, 10-2. So credit to them.